Now, I mentioned at the beginning, does creativity follow a process? And it does. It actually follows an exact series of steps. At the center of it is visualization, which means having an idea. And we're going to hear from Ansel Adams in a minute about visualization. He had the most clear statement of what it means to visualize any art form. So visualization drives the whole process. It's how you get your ideas. It's what you do with those ideas. And then the next part of the process is your tools that you use in whatever art form. If you're a chef in a kitchen, you've got your kitchen, equipment and tools and utensils and all that stuff that goes on in a kitchen. If you're a photographer, you've got your camera and your lenses and all those things that go along with that. In any art form, as a writer, you're either going to handwrite something, probably not anymore, or your computer, but you've also got your reference materials. Those are all your tools. You have to know how to use those. Then you have to get into action, and that's called working your craft. Because have you ever known gearheads that are just interested in acquiring the latest and greatest whatever, but they don't ever do anything with it? It's kind of like Car Week. We just had Car Week here. Where do those cars come from? They can't be driving them around on the street, except when they come to Carmel. But then they have 1 week where they actually get out to use that stuff, that incredible, equipment. But working your craft is where you actually get into motion and action. Then you hit the process of editing and refining. You have to be willing to look at your work and go back and tweak it. And for authors, a lot of times what you think is brilliant, you read over and you think doesn't really fit. Or more likely somebody else says that to you. That's why we have editors. And I always send my books out to what we call beta readers, and they give me their feedback, and I take that and look at it and go, okay, yeah, I do need to clarify that or change this or leave this out or whatever. That's the process of editing. And the final part of it is sharing. How does it feel if you create something and it just stays in your computer, or it stays in a shoebox, or it stays in your mind? Do you feel satisfied? Okay, so sharing, doesn't just mean with social media. It means however you get it out to the world. And there can be a lot of ways. I'm sharing with you tonight. You can, you could go to any kind of presentation or put your art on the wall somewhere. That's sharing it. By the way, one of the best ways to share your visual art is make sure you have it up in your own home and frame it, because that's your presentation to the world. Then you start getting feedback from others, and that's where the satisfaction really comes in. So the whole key is visualization. Definition of visualization is the formation of a mental image of something. You get it in your mind first. And you're going to hear from the man himself, Ansel Adams. This is visualizing Bixby Creek Bridge. And let's hear what Ansel had to say about this.
And as we talk now in photography, we speak of the external event, which is, we'll call it scenery. It's everything that happens outside in time and space, and people go snap, 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 and recording things for their own memory in the future. And contrasting with that, in the creative work, is the internal event, the thing that happens inside your mind when you see the photograph. And as Stieglitz had said, that when someone asked him about creative photography, what is creative photograph? He said, I merely go out into the world, I want to make a photograph. I come across something that excites me. I see the picture in my mind's eye, and I make the photograph, and then I give it to you as the equivalent of what I saw and felt. The whole key lies very specifically in seeing it in the mind's eye, which we call visualization. And the picture has to be there clearly and decisively. And if you have enough craft, if you've done your homework and your practice, you can then make the photograph that you desire.
How about that? Is that good advice? It's the whole key. Otherwise, remember he said you just go snap, snap, snap? You know, I come from old school photography where when we took the picture, we had to go back, take those rolls of film, process them, breathe in chemicals, then you had to print them. It was a lot of work. So you thought before you pressed the shutter. And nowadays, this is to me, one of the drawbacks of digital is you can just press it so many times. You know, 1,000 random images doesn't make one good one. So here's what his advice is. Pre-visualize, and that again can apply to any art form. If you visualize first, that gives you the roadmap where to go. And this is a picture of me kind of illustrating what visualization is all about. I don't have a camera. I'm looking over towards Bixby Creek, which is actually over here. And I'm giving you an idea of what it means to visualize. By the way, this is really good training for your eye in any visual form, but as a photographer, go around and do this because the camera is just a tool. But when you use your hands to spot photographs, how many people do that? You know, where you see, wow, that's a shot right there. I could, you know, if I had my camera with me, I missed this gorgeous shot, you know. So the point is you're using your mind to find these images. And you can do the same thing with other art forms. You can listen and hear. You can listen to sound bites around you. And those are things that you can incorporate into writing as well. This was my first visualization. This is a photograph I took in the 8th grade. I actually became a photographer in the 7th grade. I learned about the darkroom. And that was the magic moment because I found that I could really be in control of the creative process. And I'm going to show you what this came from. You may not see this very well. This is called a negative contact sheet. So back in the day, we used to have negatives. Everybody know what a negative is? Okay. It's a reversal, and it was done on film. Then you printed it in tiny form so you could see what it looked like before you enlarged it. And in this case, I had these sort of side shots, not very interesting. And then I had this idea, I visualized this idea. What if I got down below them on this sand dune and had them run and jump at a certain moment? And just when they're jumping, I press the shutter. And that's what I actually directed them to do that. I said, okay, you guys get up there. By the way, there's nothing wrong with you get the idea and then you direct people to do what you want. That's totally okay, right? So I had this idea and I stood below them in the sand dune and got them when there was a perfect arc. So this was my first visualization, I think when I was 13 years old. It told me something. You can direct these things and you can get them going in the direction that you want. Now, the thing about visualization is it applies to, again, not just any art form, but any area of life. Somebody who's dreaming up a new business or an athlete who comes up with some new technique or a musician is visualizing. Does that make sense? This is Salvador Dali's studio, which is amazing. It's in Spain. And, you know, talk about visualization. If you've looked at his work, that stuff doesn't exist anywhere but in his mind. And he put it into canvas. He brought these images out from his own mind and put them on canvas. This is another example of visualization. This is Brian Wilson. He wrote this amazing album called Pet Sounds, and one song in particular. The instruments, he's got sleigh bells, he's got trombone, he's got tambourine, he's got Coke bottles. These were all dreamed up in his mind. He went into the studio and recorded it. So there's the guy that had this all in his head. He goes into the recording studio, totally visualized, and he just got the musicians to play this and that. And they didn't know where they were going even necessarily. But it all came together. And it's considered one of the most, even the Beatles were just flipped out over this album. They were just super jealous of him coming up with this whole new sound. But that was totally visualized. Now, one way you can strengthen your visualization, this is a really easy thing to do, because you might think, wow, Mark, how do I get better at my visualization? One answer is go to museums. A lot. This happens to be our very own Museum of Art in Monterey. And the thing about visiting museums is it doesn't matter what genre you're looking at. You're going to get something's going to rub off, something's going to spark. And I have one of the photographers I interviewed is an incredible landscape photographer. And I asked him, so what was your inspiration? These are landscape photographs. Very beautiful scenes, very quiet, big, expansive scenes. He said, my inspiration was the Beatles. I went to the very last concert at Candlestick Park, and I came out of there so charged up, which is amazing, because if you've heard those concerts, you can't even really hear them. There's so much screaming going on. But something about that moment, he just became a photographer by hearing the music. So any art form is going to give you something to add to your creative library. If you combine it with this next point, which is using and keeping notebooks. Now, this is a quote from Jack London, who, by the way, spent a lot of time here in Carmel. Keep a notebook. Travel with it. Eat with it. Sleep with it. Slap into it every stray thought that flutters up into your brain. How many times have you had some amazing thought, you're drinking coffee in the morning, or you're driving, or you're on a walk, and you just get this flash of brilliance, and then you let it flutter right away and forget about it? Anybody besides me had that happen? And then the next day, what was that anyway? Well, one way to make sure that doesn't happen is use notebooks. I have so many notebooks. She's got her notebook. All right. That's a good size. You can put it in your pocket. Anybody else use notebooks besides me? Okay, I'm preaching to the choir. So the thing about a notebook, it's your book. It's nobody else's, and it's not digital. It's not going to crash. It's not going to, need rebooting. How many frustrations do we run into every day with digital devices? And it's yours. You can write on it just the way you want. You can even do it in different color ink, which I like to do. And you can go back and see what you wrote and learn from yourself. Hey, that's pretty good. Not bad. I should, remember that. Now, this book, all my books started off with notebooks. It's interesting. A lot of people say, I really would like to write a book. I don't know where to start. Well, start by writing to yourself in your notebook. And then one day, maybe you'll see you've got something you're really onto, and you can turn it into a book. But I'm a big believer, and if you combine those two things, going to museums or looking at any art form with a notebook, so you go to a museum and something really resonates, write it down. Leonardo da Vinci said, walk around and look at people and draw and sketch them in your notebook. And look at them in all sorts of different emotions. Don't just look for happy faces. Look at what do people look like when they're really mad or they're sad. And he would draw those things. That's how he had so much material to use in his paintings. Pretty amazing. At the end of every chapter, I have two things that I do. One is I have summary questions. So if we were working together and I was tutoring you or mentoring you, let's say, or we're just having a conversation, I would ask you questions and you'd ask me questions. So I'm asking you these questions. I have many more than this at the end of every chapter, but these are just two to think about. You don't have to answer them right now. What does visualization mean to you? Because anytime you hear this word, it has to resonate for you. It has to become part of your inner language that you're using. And give an example of this in your life. So perhaps later, I wish we had time, we could have everybody do this right now. Perhaps later, I see some note takers, you can answer these two questions. But if you can't remember them, they're in the book, don't worry. Everything goes back to the book. That's why I wrote it.